All right, everyone, welcome. This is Implementing Responsible Trusted AI Systems, a Fireside Chat. I'm Chris, here with Lauren Frazier from IBM. Today, we want to talk about exactly what it says on the box, building trusted artificial intelligence. Before we begin, it's just a bit of housekeeping. Wherever it is you're tuning in, please go ahead and leave a comment. Let us know where you're in from. If you're watching us on Facebook, you will need to go to StreamYard.com/Facebook if you want us to know your names. If you just want to be, anonymous cheetah or whatever in the comments, that is fine as well. But if you're on Facebook, go ahead and leave your comments there after authenticating. So, Lauren, why don't you introduce yourself real quick?
Yeah, thanks for hosting us today, Chris. I'm Lauren Frazier. I'm an IBM Content Marketing Manager with IBM Cloud Pak for Data. So that's our leading data and AI platform, runs on any cloud. And hey, we're focused really on trustworthy AI right now. So the timing couldn't be any better. So okay. We can go ahead and kick it off and, discuss the responsible AI, especially, now the stakes are higher, right? AI can be used for good, or if you use it wrong, it'll have negative consequences, whether that means in money, financials, or just trust with your customers. So businesses that handle data, they can no longer just ignore the societal responsibilities. We really need to put that at the forefront of operationalizing AI. How do we make it trustworthy? So Chris, my first question for you is, why is it important and what implications are there in deploying AI, and while especially ensuring the responsible AI is infused within?
It comes down to, if we want to trust something, we need to know that it's going to operate, with fairness and stuff. There's a lot that goes into trust, but fundamentally, we're trying to roll out this technology as a society, as a civilization, to all these different applications, right? Mortgage and loan applications, criminal recidivism, more mundane stuff like marketing effectiveness, which is sort of the area that I study. And we need to know that the machines are doing what we want them to do and not exposing us to unnecessary risk. There are no shortage of examples where AI hasn't been used responsibly, right? It hasn't been built to be trustworthy. And I think that we should probably define what trustworthy means. If you go to research.ibm.com, there's actually a really good whole section on trusted AI, but there's 4 fundamental things that make AI trustworthy. Fair, is it accountable? Yep. Is it values driven? And then is it explainable? Real quick, Lauren, when you think about fairness, what does that word mean to you?
For fairness, for me, it means equality. It means, people are being treated all the same no matter what. That data is used fairly. So that means data is used properly. It's used for the good of people, the good of the world, the good of making decisions and better business decisions, which ultimately brings in the money, but also changes and impacts the world. And it doesn't matter who and what that person does, but fairness is giving everybody that equal slate.
Yeah, it's challenging because there's different definitions of fairness, right? Some real simple examples. There's what's called blinded fairness, where you say anything that is protected, your age, your race, your gender, that data is removed. It can't be used for decision making. It's kind of like the bare bones. But one of the things that AI is really good at is doing what's called correlates, where you say, okay, I may not know your age, but if you like, Goonies and you like, I'm trying to go way back, like MC Hammer in the early days and stuff, we can infer your age, right? Because these things that you like all have a certain timeliness to them. So that's one aspect. A second would be what's called representative parity, where if I'm trying to sample some data, I try to make the data represent the population. I used to work at a company in Atlanta, and on staff at a 100-person company, there wasn't a single Black person.
Yeah.
Atlanta's 54% Black. Right?
It's like and pretty good community. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's a case where there is not representative parity. And then there's the two where we can have real, significant philosophical debates: equality of opportunity and equality of outcome. Equality of opportunity means we all get the same chance at success, but success is left up to our individual merits. And then equality of outcome is no matter who we are, we all get the same thing. And there are definitely cases where, like COVID vaccines. We want equality of outcome. Everybody gets it, right?
And everybody gets it, but you know how hard it was to get it. AI could have been used more to drive who needs to get that first, instead of us, for instance, me fighting over Eventbrite and my mom also in a whole other state trying to get my Nana who's 90 a vaccine. AI could have helped us just improve that, and hopefully we don't have to see that going forward, but we will be ready if something, you know, a health crisis does come up again.
Exactly. So fairness is part one of trusted AI. Two is accountability, where the machine tells us how it made its decision. So I go to apply for a loan, and it says, "Hey, Chris, your loan was denied for because your credit score was below 670, or your household income was insufficient." But it should also tell us what wasn't involved in the decision. Like, "Hey, Chris, the fact that you're a guy wasn't a factor in the decision. The fact that you're old wasn't a factor in your decision." Right? And we need our machines to tell us, like, this is how I made the decisions. And a lot of machines, they're very, very opaque. They won't tell us what's going on. Yeah. Number three is our AI should be values driven. And this is where I'm just going to get myself into a whole bunch of trouble here. Our companies and the values that we have as human beings inform the data that we put into these machines. AI is nothing more than a bunch of math. Right? It's not magic, it's math. And it's math that's trained on data. So the data we put in means that that's what the machine learns to write its own code from. We have to have values that are aligned with the outcomes we want. There's what the heck? If you look at some of the things that like Facebook does, and they have been rightly criticized in the public press for making some questionable decisions. And if you look at their core values, be bold, focus on impact, move fast, be open, build social value. At no point in there does it say, make the world a better place, make people healthier, promote truth. These are other values that other companies might have. And so their AI reflects their values. So as part of trusted AI, you almost have to trust the company making the AI.
Yeah. And especially as a customer, we don't, as a consumer of Facebook or of anything, or even just applying for an HR loan, or even behind the scenes in AHR, applying for a mortgage loan, you don't understand the big technology around it. So, companies have to make sure that there's a way that they can explain it, because I think, you don't want to be in the court of law. You don't want to be the front page on the news. And then that's when your customer realizes, oh, wait, my data hasn't been being used properly. So, I guess with the rise of all of these events last year too, including how we work in the pandemic and some of these societal and political events I think we all know of, I think data reflects the drastic changes in human behaviors itself. So as we kind of talked about already, the pandemic, but what else do you see that is different from this year from last, and why does this matter today and in the scope of AI?
I want to go back real quick. There's one more piece of trusted AI that I think matters, and it answers this question really well. That is the difference between explainability and interpretability. AI has to be both of these things. The analogy that I love to use is, imagine you're at a famous restaurant, right? And you're trying to figure out, like, what did they use to make that chocolate cake? Just by tasting it, you can tell, like, okay, this is pretty good. Then you go home and try it yourself. Like, okay, it's not quite the same. That's explainable AI, right? Where you see the outcome of the model and you go, okay, this looks okay. It seems okay. Interpretable AI is when you are in the kitchen with the chef watching them, like, oh, you're not using almond extract, you're using cherry extract. That's you let that rise for a little bit longer than normal. Why do you do that? Like, it helped develop the flavor or something. When we're talking about interpretable versus explainable AI, a lot of companies are really pushing for explainable because it's cost effective to just say, oh yeah, the model did the right thing. See the results. They're like, yeah, but I don't know that. If I am concerned about things like bias in my AI, that's not good enough. One of the things I love about tools like IBM Watson Studio is that it will, in the Auto AI module, it'll build a model, but then you push a button says, turn this back into code. And then it turns it back into code. Now I can step through line by line and say, what decisions did you make? How did you build this code? And if I see something like, you did use something I told you not to do, I can take that out. Because you're right. In a court of law, I'm going to need to produce the code. Yeah. And I honestly think that's okay. For humans, we have a presumption in law that you're innocent until proven guilty.
Mm-hmm.
I almost feel like with machines, it should be the reverse. Like the machine should be suspected of bias until we can prove that it isn't. And we prove it isn't by producing the code.
Mm-hmm.
The challenge is, and the reason why so many tech companies don't want to go that route, is it's expensive. It's cost inefficient, and it's controversial. But going to your question about what's different this year than last year, the pandemic has been essentially a world war, right? It's a world war of the entirety of the human race against a very, very, very tiny enemy that can replicate like crazy. And it's a crisis. And the funny thing about crisis is that it amplifies things. The good gets better, the bad gets worse. And all the things, the inequalities, the inequities in our healthcare system, our income gaps, pay gaps, get worse in a crisis. Just like you see, what was it, the stat? GoFundMe is America's third largest health insurance plan, right? People asking for help, begging for help is the third largest health insurance plan. Now, to your point, AI could help solve a lot of these things if it was deployed responsibly and in a trustworthy way. But the challenge is things like training data that goes into it. We have to help people build better systems that look for bias at all times in the system. So we have to say, is the data going in biased? Mm-hmm. Is the model biased? And does the model drift? Again, one of the things I like in Watson Studio is that it tells you in the model monitoring, hey, this thing's going off the rails. Do you want to do something about it?
No, that's true. And I think it's important that we just also, with Watson Studio, you are able to model or monitor that model, but also interpret and explain. And that's the key things you were saying. It's not just about explaining, but proving it to anybody, and also making it easy for maybe that court of law or the external folks to understand, okay, I see how my data was used if I ever did need to ask that. So, I know that for us, IBM's always strived with innovation and bringing benefits to everyone and not just a few. And I think even in hiring, my own team is pretty diverse. So I have enjoyed being at IBM for the past 7 years, but this philosophy is also applied to AI, and we aim to create and offer reliable and understanding technology. We understand that AI is embedded in everyday life, right? Which you were talking about, whether it's business, government, medicine, healthcare, all of that. But our goal is to help people and organizations adopt it responsibly. So I know we kind of define trustworthy AI. Would you define responsible AI as the same thing as that? And what are the opportunities and challenges that might come with the use of ethical AI?
Trust is what you build up front. Responsible is what happens after, right? Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like any relationship, right? You build a relationship, you build trust up front, and then on the back end, you prove that trust was well-founded or not, right? Depending on the technology. When you look at the ethical use of AI, it's funny, ethics is a tricky word because ethics, sort of the classical Greek sense means you do what you say, right? If you look at, the way Facebook implements its AI, they do what they say. At no point did they say they're going to make the world a better place. They're going to set the whole world on fire. But it's ethical because they're doing what they said. The question that we have to ask ourselves as the people who maintain AI is, are we doing the things that we want to accomplish? Are we creating the outcomes that we think are fair and that are equitable? And for a more practical way of things looking at, are we doing things that are going to get us sued? Right? If in a court of law we're like, oh yeah, sorry about that, we accidentally. When you have those data sources, inside the machines, there's so many ways it can go wrong. I was at a conference a couple of years ago, the MarTech conference, which and of course every vendor on the floor had, we have AI in our product. Like, yeah, it's not Nutella, guys. It doesn't need to be on everything. And this one vendor had this map of Boston. Yeah. And they were trying to predict ideal customers, and it's for Dunkin' Donuts, right? Now, for those of you who I know we see in the comments, you have people listening from all around the world. Dunkin' Donuts is sort of a mass market coffee and donuts shop, right? And pretty much everybody in New England, the New England region of the United States, consumes Dunkin' Donuts in some form. The only people who don't are dead. And this company tried to predict these ideal customers, had this map of Boston. There were red dots in the areas that were, ideal, and then there were, black dots in the areas that weren't. I looked at this map and I said, so you think the ideal customers are all in the financial district, downtown, Cambridge, Roxbury, Dorchester, and Mattapan, which are predominantly lower income, predominantly black areas, say there's no ideal customers. I'm like, I'm sorry, you're full of shit. Because everybody in Boston, regardless of race, gender, background, you consume dunks in some fashion. And I said, what you really did is you reinvented redlining.
Yeah.
Which is, again, yeah. So again, for those folks who are not familiar with American history, in the 1930s, insurance companies would take maps of the world, of cities, and draw red lines around predominantly, minority areas of cities. Say, we don't want to give loans in these areas. Yeah. And that's not an equitable outcome, particularly for something like coffee. Like, okay, if you're selling Gulfstream airplanes, then yes, there's an argument to be made that some sections of the city by income level, you might be justified that, but you're selling coffee. You're selling $1 coffee. Everybody can get that. And so with that, ethical, responsible use of AI, we have to think about what kind of risk are we opening ourselves up to if we implement it badly.
And I think it's important to also say, I think it's something you mentioned before, is who's in the boardroom, who's behind there making these decisions. So I think someone in the chat brought up a good question is, where do you get training data when you know the data itself does not represent the overall pool accurately? If folks aren't behind the scenes and can say, wait, this is redlining again. This is because clearly someone didn't look at that. It's just see quite obvious that we're just doing something that we're trying to, it's still kind of going on sometimes. And we're trying to pivot and change the world, right? So how do people get that correct data? How do we cleanse it? How do we even get there?
Data's too far gone at that point. You actually raised a really good point. You can get bias in AI, all kinds, including allowable bias, to creep in at 6 different spots in the process. But the number one place where it starts is in the people you hire, right? Yeah. If the people you hire, and I'm not saying that you're hiring biased people, but if you hire people who don't think to ask the question, hey, is there a bias in this data, then you will never get to the point where the systems can detect it. Now, if you get somebody to say, hey, I think this data might have a problem. I don't know what it is, but there might be a problem in here. And it's built into your strategy, which is the second place it can creep in. Then there are tools that you can use to assess your data. IBM has a great toolkit called the AI Fairness 360 toolkit. It's free, it's open source. You can use it in R and Python. I use the R version. And you feed it data and it says, hey, what are the protected classes, right? What are the things that cannot be discriminatory? What kind of fairness are you looking for? We talked about the different kinds of fairness. And then what do you want to do about it? I mean, it will say, like, yes, there's a skew of plus or minus this percentage, or there are issues here. And then it's up to us to say, how do we want to deal with that? In Watson Studio, you can handle this at a couple of different points. In the data, the model building side up front, you can actually, with the toolkits, help flip bits. So if I have a data set that's 60% male and 40% female, Watson Studio with our guidance can say, and you have to tell it to do this. I want you to flip the bit, randomly sample the data set and flip the bit on 10% of the males to turn them female so that it balances the data set out. The model monitoring does the same thing as well. It'll say, okay, I can flip bits around or change data around to try and remix the sample to keep it fair, to keep it on the rails. The other option is you filter the data up front and say, okay, I'm going to do, say, propensity score matching, and I'm only going to allow an even gender split, or I'm only going to allow a representative population split in the data, so that what goes into the training for the model construction is fair to begin with. So it's a really good question. It's a challenging question because you have to be aware of how to do these things.
Yeah, and aware of what bias is.
Exactly.
Aware of how to spot it, right? So I guess that goes into kind of the automation of AI. More companies are using AI operationalizing, but only by embedding ethical principles into these applications and processes, can they really be built on trust, right? So what do you see as a key criteria for bringing models to production and driving value from the deployments? And what do you see in like trends in the architecture that folks are adopting or should adopt?
There's a few things here that I think are important. One is automated machine learning has really come a long way. Lotus was asking in the comments of the link to the IBM tool. If you go to aif360.mybluemix.net, I put a link in the comments. That's the AI Fairness 360 toolkit. So there's a few different components that you need to have in the system. And here's the challenge that, again, a system like Cloud Pak for Data will address that. A sort of mixed bag of individual solutions will not necessarily do because they're not connected to each other. So you really want that integration. You need to be able to get at the data where it lives, right? Yeah. So being able to use something like Red Hat OpenShift to virtualize the data out of where it is and make it into a common layer. You need a system like AI Fairness 360 to look at the data and say, okay, is there bias going into it? What kinds of issues are there? I like tools like Watson Studio's Auto AI because in some ways it takes some of the decision making and the potential biases I have as a data scientist out, because I feed it a data set and say, here's the 44 things I tried. Here's the best result. Here's the 7 different measures of accuracy, which, I think this is the best one. But then I can always go back and I can push the button and say, okay, generate the code. I can always go back and say, I really actually want to use gradient boosting for this. So you have that sort of that in the model construction phase. Then you have deployment. You got to get that model into production, and then you have to monitor the model as well. And this needs to be an ecosystem where the pieces talk to each other, as opposed to being individual point solutions. Because what tends to happen with point solutions is they break really easily. I can pass a model from, say, RStudio into a standalone platform, but that standalone platform can't monitor drift and then can't pass back into my original code and say, this is a problem. I have to do that manually. And if I'm working on 5 or 6 projects for different clients, whatever, I may not remember to do that. If I've got a system like Cloud Pak for Data in Watson Studio, it does it for me. Right. So in a lot of ways, it takes my biases out of the equation, and it also automates a lot of the maintenance, the operation of AI. And that part it's something people don't think about. When people think about AI, they think it's like this magical unicorn that, you just strap your data to it and it flies off into the sun.
Here it goes. No.
Exactly. And it's not. It's almost like AI really is nothing more than really fancy spreadsheets, right? You don't expect Microsoft Excel to run itself. Right? You have to do stuff with it. And in the same way, AI is just software, except it's software that a machine wrote from your data. So you want that ecosystem so that it's running your data, your models, and monitoring all in one place. And that way, it can tell you proactively, I think something's wrong here.
And your whole team gets the visibility of it as well, not just you. You can see where the issue happened. How can we go back? Where can we, mitigate that risk or mitigate that bias? And, I know you already brought up HR, and I know one of IBM's biggest clients is using AI to ensure hiring and other HR practices are fair, and especially with corporate policies and the social responsibilities of today. But what kind of client questions are you getting when it comes to operationalizing AI or the use of AI?
It's funny. Our clients in a lot of ways don't care about AI. What they care about is better, faster, cheaper results. Right? Okay. We want things to work better. We want more accurate models. We want not even the models. One of our larger clients, an automotive client, they just want to know what to do. Help me make better decisions faster. But going into that, there's a lot of challenges. The biggest challenge that a lot of people face is, it mirrors the AI lifecycle. Do you have the right people? Mm-hmm. Do you have the right strategy? Do you have the right data? Do you have the right algorithm choices? Do you have the right models? And do you have the right monitoring it to keep it all intact? That hierarchy, that process in a lot of cases is really broken at a lot of companies. They don't have the right people, which is why they need, firms like TrustInsights and companies like IBM.
Mm-hmm.
They have a strategy, but the strategy may not be optimized for AI, because AI is all about getting machines to do things that humans, tasks that humans do. And if you're not thinking about being process oriented and you're not thinking about how do I be efficient, then your AI is not really going to work for you. And then the big one by far is the data is a hot mess, right? It's
All
everywhere.
Yeah.
Exactly. The data yep. It's everywhere. It's in the wrong formats. It's not structured well. It's corrupted. Even something as simple like one of the things we see a lot when we're doing marketing analytics is, hey, you launched a new website and you forgot to put your Google Analytics tracking code on it for 3 weeks. So you go back in the data, there's a big 3-week gap here. Like, what happened, guys? Like, oh, they something as simple as that can really hose even basic analysis. And then there's all this stuff around the humans. So how do we communicate what AI is doing to to the people who are the stakeholders? How do we help them understand that you will get better outcomes? How do we show them some early, easy wins? So one of the things that we do a lot of is attribution analysis. Take all the data that you have and say, these are the things that work in your marketing. That's a pretty easy win because it helps people understand, oh, I'm investing 44% of my budget in Facebook ads, but it's delivering 2% of my leads. Like, yeah, that.
Where else can we put this? Yeah.
Exactly. So those are a couple of the examples where we use it extensively. We're actually working on a couple other projects where we're trying to look at building, ongoing running models that help do some predictions, some forecasting. We just did one recently doing predictive analytics, just helping a client understand, hey, here's what's likely to happen in the next 3 months for this particular type of content. You should time your promotions to when interest by the audience is going to be the highest, because that's when people are paying attention. People are they're like spotlights, right? And the spotlight moves around. It's watching the Falcon, the Winter Soldier. It's watching. It's such a good show. But you earn very small amounts of time with people's attention. But when they're thinking about something that they care about, that is something you solve, the spotlight's on you. So what can you do to take them advantage of that time? If you're not prepared, the spotlight hits you and then moves on, right? And you're like, well, where'd they go? But if you use predictive analytics, if you use AI intelligently, when the spotlight hits you, you're like, hey, here's the thing you can buy. And then they buy it, and then the spotlight moves on.
Yeah.
And that's the real operationalizing of AI, is not just getting the system running, but getting the benefits from it.
And it's not just the benefits, it's the benefits, but predicting those outcomes and intelligently through automated processes, I think, are key. And it's also, I think it goes back to what we were saying at the beginning. It's not just about the business impact, it's about the impact to the world you're making and to your customers, and how you're improving lives by these decisions. Whether that's loans, whether that's, even data for universities and students. There's so many ways that data can be used. So go ahead.
We have to be very careful about when we should not be using AI, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think there are cases where it is clear that AI is the wrong choice.
Yeah.
I'll give you 2 examples.
Okay.
Example 1, ProPublica did an investigation in 2016 of police departments creating an algorithm attempting to predict recidivism. Recidivism, for those who don't know, is the likelihood that someone will re-offend or commit another crime. The algorithm that this company came up with predicted that Black Americans would re-offend 5 times more than they actually did. But even worse, the algorithm itself was 20% accurate, right? You can flip a coin and do better than this algorithm by a substantial margin, not just a little bit. That was a case where it's still not clear whether somebody had their thumb on the scale and it was intentionally biased,
Mm-hmm.
or if they just fed it such bad data that it came up with it. So that's a case where the data was bad and the people putting it together probably didn't know what they were doing, or they did and it was malicious. Second example, this is a big one. AI is not a good choice in a lot of things like healthcare and finance for specific populations, not because AI, the technology is bad, right?
Mhm.
But because the whole data set is corrupted. Example, Black American healthcare outcomes. There is zero good data about it. Zero
Yes.
in the entire country. Why? Because systemic racism has created such a mass of negative outcomes that it does not matter where you sample your data from. It's going to be bad. What you have to do is kind of look what we were talking about with Watson Studio, where you have to almost change other people's races in a system to introduce known good data to say, like, yeah, the ideal health expectancy outcome should be like 78 years old.
Mhm.
Because of problems that are outside the data, macro systemic problems, you can't trust that data. So one of the things that you have to ask yourself when you're deploying AI is the data itself so corrupted that it cannot be usable, that you can't recover it? And there's no good data to be found. If that's the case, then AI is not the right choice. You will have to rely on boring old natural intelligence until you have better data.
And I'd rather us rely on that, but I do have hope for the future that, hopefully these companies, I know that IBM is striving for it, but hopefully we continue to see just from the past year and all of these items being brought to the forefront, right? I think there's been a lot more visibility on how just much systemic racism has affected all of us and outcomes. And I just hope that all organizations start to think, how can we really start to go behind the scenes, look at our data from the beginning. Is this what we should even be using? And hopefully in the future, it could be used for good in those areas as well. Always improvement, right, in all technologies, especially with AI, because, folks always think it's going to take over their jobs too, but hopefully it can just be used for good. And that's the key thing is in what we're trying to drive here as well.
Yeah, I think the whole thing, like, is AI going to take my job, is it's a nuanced conversation, because a job is a series of tasks, right?
Yeah.
You don't just do one thing anymore. At the very least, you at least have to attend meetings about the one thing that you do. And so AI is really good at tasks. It's still good at being very narrow, at least until IBM perfects quantum computing and they become sentient. It's a little ways away, but right now it is very much good at taking tasks, and the more repetitive a task is, the easier it is to automate. The good news is that a lot of those tasks that are so easy to automate, you don't really want to be doing anyway. I used to work at a PR firm, and there's one task a junior person had. They were copying and pasting results from Google to a spreadsheet 8 hours a day. I'm like, how have you not clawed your eyeballs out by now?
No, that used to be my role there. So
it's like, why are you doing this? This is something that a machine should be doing. It is so repetitive, and the human there adds so little value that the goal then is to say, okay, we're going to save you 7 hours and 45 minutes of your day, but now we want you to use what you're good at, creativity, thinking across domains and stuff, to add value to this instead of just copying and pasting spreadsheets. So there's this concept, from the 1930s, Joseph Schumpeter, the idea of creative destruction, that yes, things like AI absolutely will destroy certain tasks, but in doing so, they will create new opportunities that will ideally be better. Nobody enjoys getting a saw, going out to lake and sawing up ice in the wintertime, right? Nobody enjoys that.
Exactly. And no one predicted AI back then, right? So that leaves, as AI might take over some things, that leaves folks for innovation and other things that we might not even know could be possible in the future. So with that, Chris, it's been a great conversation. Thank you for hosting us. Thank you. Are there any last words you want to say before I share some of the resources in the description?
I would encourage people to at least start, if you haven't already started thinking about the applications of automation for even just, not AI, but just automation. We are entering a period of time now where productivity is sort of the golden calf that everybody's looking for in business. even if your company doesn't have an enterprise-wide strategy for AI, you as a business person should be thinking about how do we implement, even on a small scale, piloting it. You can sign up for an IBM cloud account and try out Watson Studio. I believe you get 50 CPU hours per month, which is enough to test some stuff out. It's not enough to run an enterprise wide thing, but you can start testing it out. There are so much good open source in R and Python and learning those languages. If you go to cognitiveclass.ai, that's IBM's free online university to learn big data, data science, machine learning, AI. It's an incredible resource, completely 100% free. You even get cool little badges that can go on your LinkedIn profile. And I think getting your toes wet in this stuff is so important, just so you know what's possible. And the more people try it out, I think the better it is for everyone, because it helps to demystify it. It's not magic. It's just a bunch of math. So, Lauren, what are some of the resources you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, so, Think 2021 is coming up. Of course, it's not our great event that used to be in person that I love, but it is virtual. So it's coming up May 11th in the Americas and May 12th in APAC, Japan, and EMEA. You can also sign up for part 2 of our What's Next in AI webinar series. That's something we've been working through IBM. This is on May 19th, and that will dive in a little bit more with some of our experts on the IBM side, some of the product marketers, on just the importance, what's next, how you can improve your own AI strategy. And then finally, and not last, the Gartner report. This one goes into how Watson Studio is one of the leaders in machine learning and data science capabilities. So just so you can see, what the analysts have to say. But, it's been a pleasure. And I think what you said, we need to just get, companies just need to use AI responsibly. And I think consumers need to also ensure that these companies do get held to those standards as well. So it'll be cool to see how it goes going forward, especially improvements in AI as well.
Exactly. And if you have any interest in it, we have a course as well. It's not free. Go to TrustInsights.ai/data science 101 if you're so interested. Thanks for watching today. If you'd like to share this episode, go to the link that you probably found it by, TrustInsights.ai/IBM Trusted AI. That link will take you back to the recording of this show. You can share it with your friends. Please do. We'd love to have more people get a sense of what's important about AI and making sure that it's fair, making sure that we're all working towards outcomes that are equitable for everybody. Thank you, Lauren, and the IBM team for being with us today, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care, everyone.
Thanks. Happy Friday.